Jim, to the point that Peter just made about HAARP as a gatekeeper, here's more from Jonathan Lemire on HAARP's very particular set of skills. HAARP has become an Oval Office gatekeeper, a ubiquitous travel companion, and one of only a few people with the keys to the president's social media account. She's become one of the most unlikely powerful people in the administration. If someone with such a fawning view of the president is their gatekeeper and they are able to filter the information that the president of the United States sees, should the public then wonder if the commander-in-chief is, in fact, seeing the full picture?
Absolutely. And the fact is, I ran this process in the White House. She never would have got through the front door until she had a security clearance, much less lasted a year. Because to your point, she's sitting with the president of the United States when he's meeting with world leaders, when he's talking to business people, when he's meeting with members of Congress. She's seeing everything that he's doing, and she has no security clearance. It just shows you that this White House doesn't take national security seriously. They stack up boxes in bathrooms. They allow people to travel with the president without security clearance. There's no real process. You have a gatekeeper who's absolutely unqualified. None of this makes any sense in any sort of White House that I would want to be a part of. And people can look at this president and say, what are you doing?
Well, since you are one of the only people we have spoken with who's actually worked through this process before, I have some questions that have been bothering me about this story. One, the fact that Natalie HAARP twice declined, I believe was the word, to fill out the paperwork necessary for her security clearance. I have never heard of a White House staffer declining to fill out that paperwork. And two, the fact that the president of the United States, who is currently waging a war of choice with Iran, had to take time out of his daily schedule to tell his own aide, hey, you have to fill out the paperwork in order to get the security clearance necessary. Both show an administration that is simply not focused on the American people or on the agenda that they promised.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Where's the chief of staff? Where's the deputy chief of staff to say, you're filling out this paperwork or you're not getting through the front door? And why wouldn't she? The question is, what is she hiding that she didn't want to fill this out for almost a year? What relationship should she have? What was her concern? Because these are not hard. They take some time and you got to sit down with a lawyer and go through it all. But what was she concerned about that she didn't want to fill this out? And why would the White House in their process allow her anywhere near the president until she had a security clearance?
I'm not sure, Peter, if Jim Messina meant that as a rhetorical question or not, but I am curious if you have reporting on where was Susie Wiles in all of this? Wasn't she supposed to be the key gatekeeper?
Well, she is, obviously, but she recognizes when Trump wants somebody to be near him, she's not going to fight him on things that she's going to lose on, right? And she recognizes, I assume, that the president wants Natalie HAARP around him. He wants people around him who tell him he's great, who reinforce for him that he's right about all of these issues, who help him, go after his opponents when he issues these social media, blasts. And I think that one of the secrets of Susie Wiles' success is recognizing the fights that she can win and not taking on the ones that she can't.
Vaughn, do we know why the First Lady was out of the public view for so long and why yesterday was the day she decided to make an appearance?
It's not clear why yesterday was the day. The Indy race is here on Sunday in Washington, D.C., and we are told that she is going to be, along with the president, part of the pace car that does the initial lap around the track. So we know that we will be seeing her there for that. Her introduction, though, yesterday to everyone in the Rose Garden or the Rose Patio was, I think, a particularly unique moment amid this news cycle. Take a listen.
Good afternoon. I heard you missed me. Here I am.
There was the First Lady of the United States in a moment that could very well live in history documentation for a whole while, Alicia.
Pretty incredible. I heard you miss me. It is interesting to me that this comes as Trump's press secretary is leaving. And I wonder, Peter Baker, if that is incidental or if there is something to the fact that one of the people who's been in charge of the president's messaging is no longer.
Well, I think that's a separate thing. I think Karoline Leavitt has her reasons for stepping down. That's a very tough job for anybody under the best of circumstances. She just had her second child, and she would tell you, I think, that she wants to find ways of balancing her life. That's understandable. But yeah, I think that, again, everybody in that White House has to recognize the reality of working for a president who's not a conventional figure there. This is not a George Bush or Barack Obama kind of presidency. This is a president who has made clear that he wants certain people around him, that he wants things done a certain way. And so that's why you see his spokespeople going after Jon Ossoff, but also the media in a very vigorous way in the last few days, because he wants them to be pushing back. But as our friend Jonathan wrote, it's only elevated the story. It's made the story into a much bigger thing than it might have been. And he simply let it go without much comment. People would have moved on, but instead they have sort of forced it into the conversation, and I think it's attracted a lot of attention, especially online.
Vaughn, I want to ask you the same question, but in a different way, which is just in the past week, there's been a flurry of leaks. You have GOP sources inside the White House speaking out. Talk to me both about how unusual that is, and the fact that we're now in a window where you have other people auditioning for the job that Karoline Leavitt once held.
This is a difficult job to hold. And it's going to be a difficult job for anybody coming in that was not a part of the 2023-2024 presidential campaign. As Peter well knows, we've reported about that insulated circle around Donald Trump ever since he left Washington, D.C. post January 20th, 2021. At Mar-a-Lago, it was a small crew around him, including Natalie Harp. There is a small, loyal political circle that included Susie Wiles. I think that there is a question, right? How long is Susie Wiles even committed to this? This is for the president. Of course, if he chooses to have a press secretary come in and replace, it's somebody that he has to have full faith and confidence is to not only going to go and defend the Iran war with the expectation it is continuing, but also be able to go and do what Sean Spicer and Sarah Huckabee Sanders struggled to do in their past capacities. And that was ultimately push in, the way Alyssa Farah Griffin used to be in the position at the White House, right? You have to go and commit yourself to being unyieldingly loyal to lies and to misrepresentations by the president. And he is keenly aware of what they are saying. And I think that there is a recognition within the White House right now that the jobs of those who remain is going to become increasingly difficult because of the expectations of those who are representing him when on camera. And it's clear where his focus is, around the White House ballroom, around the helipad, suggesting that affordability is not an actual issue, suggests that talks with Iran don't have to exist, that we've already won the war. Those are damning and difficult misrepresentations about the current state of domestic and foreign affairs that the next press secretary is going to have to go out there and commit to at a time in which the president is doubling down in his backing of Natalie Harp, somebody whose letters have now been released. And clearly what the letters do, I think it's important to note, is that it shows just the extent to which some staffers are willing to go in their concessions to the president to meet his favor. In one of these letters that the White House has denied the substance of, Natalie Harp tells the president that he can cuss her out when he so chooses in order to make her better, that she wants to be always a sounding board and be there for him. That is the stakes of what we're talking about in terms of who the president has around him and what the president wants.
Jim, earlier I was listening to an interview between Jim Acosta and Heather Cox Richardson, who I think has been such a clear voice in this moment where we're all concerned about the nature of our democracy. And she said, this is an important story, but don't get lost in it. Don't allow it to be a distraction, because there are lots of other big, important stories happening, whether it is the war in Iran, the president's war of choice in Iran, whether it is an economy that most Americans feel is not working for them. I would argue we can do both. We can talk about all of that. We can talk about the power outages in Indiana. We can talk about the fact that Puerto Ricans, United States citizens, many are currently without water and have been for several weeks now. But it is important to all of us, I would contend, to know where the president of the United States is getting his information from and who he is getting it from, because so much of what we hear from this White House is determined by those inputs.
Absolutely right. And it goes to Peter's point. We're sitting 74 days before the election, And they decided this was the most important thing they could do this week. They went to war to defend this woman because she's the closest person to the president. They didn't spend time talking about expenses. They didn't spend time talking about how to get out of this war. They didn't spend time talking about how to lower oil prices or gas prices. They decided to defend the person closest to the president because they understand how damning this indictment is and how it shows a White House out of control who is surrounded by lackeys who will only tell the president what he wants to hear. And yet in 74 days, the voters get to make their choice. And, if you look at the numbers, he's underwater with independent voters by 47 points. Like, we just haven't seen numbers like this before. And you can see why. Voters have started to figure out that he doesn't care about them.